One of the interesting things about audio and video is in the world of control, ultimately the best control is no control. The best control is invisible.
Well, geez, you've reinvented what Dolby Atmos or DTS or RO3D is.
The problem with audio and video is that
Wow, that was a great cliffhanger intro if ever I've heard one to a podcast. Welcome to the Smarter Spaces podcast. I'm your host, Neil Fleuster, and it's great to have you here on today's episode. But we don't just want you on today's episode. No matter where you watch or listen or consume your podcast, hit that subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends all about the Smarter Spaces podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback and tell us what you'd like to hear and see in future episodes. But let's talk about today's episode. Two great guests joining us to talk about best practices in audio and something called RP22, a new best practice that has been introduced at this year's CEDIA show, and these guests are going to be talking us through all of those best practices and how you can get the most out of your audio in your smarter space. So let's get into today's episode. I've got Walt and Peter. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves to everyone out there and tell them all about yourself and a little bit more about this RP22 immersive audio design that we're going to be talking about on today's episode?
I'm Peter Aylett. My day job is I'm a partner at a little Italian company called Officina Acustica, and I'm also a CEDIA-holic. I've been a CEDIA volunteer now for around 25 years. I've taught for CEDIA for about 25 years, and I'm currently very, very privileged to be chair of R10. R10 is a collaboration between the CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, and CEDIA to develop recommended practices and standards for the installation of stuff in mainly residential environments. I also chaired
installation of stuff.
I mean, I could sort of list
it's a lovely
long load of subsystems, but stuff just keeps it easy. It covers everything.
I love it.
And I also spent 5.5, 6 years chairing the work group that wrote the RP22 Immersive Audio Design Recommended Practice, which is a topic of today's conversation.
Fantastic. So you're certainly in the know. Walt, can you beat that, or can you match where we go?
It's not a beat, and that's one of the cool things which we'll get into about this group. We have such diversity. It's what makes us strong. So I've been in the industry for 30 years, or over 30 years in various roles, integrator, product manager, all kinds of stuff, but was always involved in standards and recommended practices, chairing groups and participating in the CTA side, which is a Consumer Technology Association that does a CES show, and the CEDIA side. And about 7 years ago, came over to CEDIA to be the Senior Director of Technology and Standards for CEDIA. And I also do the CEDIA podcast. So Peter and I live, breathe, and eat this stuff since we were children. So, and most of the people that are on our group are exactly the same.
Very cool. Now, I know we're obviously, as I say, talking about this new RP22, and it's there. It's a standard. It's not coming. It's now there. And again, obviously, the world of smart home is a bit like the Wild West out there. And I guess this really helps from an audio point of view, get those design nailed down and gives people that baseline to go through. Do you want to talk us through where this started, where it came from, and again, what you've implemented in this RP22 practice?
Do you mind if I do a quick preface before Peter dives into it?
Please do. You
mentioned the word standard, and I know it's something we wanted to talk about. It's actually a recommended practice, and it's not a standard.
Okay.
It's a recommended practice because the art of cinema design or art of any immersive audio or video design means you have to make, it's all a series of compromises. So we can't say thou shalt put this speaker here no matter what. So it's a guideline. It's a recommended practice that gives you, that helps guide you to how to do a system in a space, because spaces change. People work in all kinds of crazy spaces, and Peter can get into that because he's done that. But the other point is a recommended practice is not a lesser document than a standard. This was still developed underneath the ANSI process, peer reviewed, consensus driven. We can get into that more later, but I just wanted to make sure I clarified it was a recommended practice and it's not a lesser thing than a standard is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, I think there could be some misconception between the idea of a standard and a practice. And again, it's good that we've got that. And I guess it gives people that blueprint and architecture, and as you say, a best practice to follow, to achieve towards, or to strive towards, to get the optimum set up in their environment.
Absolutely. One of the interesting things about audio and video is, in the world of control, ultimately the best control is no control. The best control is invisible. The best control, you don't think about it, you just use it. And really, really great user interfaces and great user experiences should be very, very natural. So once you've used it a bit, you just don't have to think about it. And when it comes down to it, if you press a button and the right thing happens every single time, always, you've done your job. And I kind of look at that as a binary thing. Does it work or not? The problem with audio and video is that it's not enough just to get a picture and just to get a sound. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of the industry works. Okay, I've got sound out of all my speakers. I've got a picture on the screen. Tick in the box, job done, pay me, move on to the next job.
One, yeah.
So what we've really tried to do with all of these recommended practices coming together, and it's worth noting that RP22 is the first of what will ultimately be a set of, I think it's 6 recommended practices that come together to look at both the audio and the video side of immersive experiences in the home. So the RP22 is audio, RP23 is the video companion,
Right.
and they're both design recommended practices. So when I say design recommended practices, the performance of the system is on paper verification. There is no recommendation for measurement. This is on paper verification during the engineering design stage. For measurement, we've got another couple of recommended practices. RP32, which is currently in progress, is the audio measurement and verification recommended practice. That's just a working title. And then RP33 will be the video measurement and verification recommended practice. And the other thing to tie all of those together, and we had a sneak preview of the first part of it, is RP1. And RP1 is a recommended practice for manufacturers to say, please give us engineering data on products.
Right.
And that's probably a weird thing for the commercial biased listeners to this podcast, because in the commercial world, you've had specs on projectors and on speakers and amplifiers forever.
Yep.
In the residential world, unfortunately, those specs tend to be written by marketing departments rather than engineers. So they're dumbed down for consumers, but we need those engineering specifications in order to do the on-paper calculations and on-paper verification at the design stage, to then pass that on to whoever's doing the commissioning and calibration to ensure that they've got a really, really good base to work with. Because,
Right.
If you make a mistake during the design stage and the thing is designed wrong and you come to installation, no amount of catch up at the installation, commissioning and calibration phase is going to get you back on track. So you've got to have that on paper verification correct.
And how does this work with regards to things like multi-channel and immersive with regards to these practices? I mean, there's lots of, I guess when we're talking about audio, there's multiple elements of this. Is obviously like music, there's movies, home theatre and things like that. How does that kind of work, and how's those terms defined with regards to discrete speakers, multi-channel, immersive and all of that?
It's a really, really interesting question, Neil, and we debated long and hard over what immersive means. And when it comes down to it, 2-channel stereo can be really, really, really immersive. And there's nothing to stop you following a huge amount of these recommended practices just for 2-channel. So I'd say the immersive is more of a sort of a catchy marketing thing rather than
your marketing term, yeah.
yeah, rather than something specific. And on the work group, we had a gentleman who was one of the original team of 5 that invented Dolby Atmos, and he was responsible for the consumer Dolby Atmos release. We had another gentleman who, at the time he was on the work group, he was CTO for Xperi, who are the holding company for IMAX and DTS, and he was the main system architect for DTS:X Pro. So
Right.
we had a lot of involvement from the format providers to make sure that what we're doing didn't contradict their recommendations. And our view really was that as a consumer, as a user, you should be blissfully unaware of the format being played back. You know, it's not really for a user to make these decisions. They should have the media. The system should render and display and reproduce that media, and they should be completely oblivious of what that actual format is.
Very cool.
I'd like to embellish that a little bit. So those are two of the key contributors. We also, of course, had integrators, and we had manufacturers, and we had acousticians, and we had content creators. So that we had a really it's all about balance. When we do anything, we want balance because we want to get everyone's perspective. And that really helped us hone this all in. The other thing to be noted is this is kind of geared towards small rooms, which is like residences. And small rooms are super hard to do. They're way harder to do than big rooms. So we basically have adapted. So a lot of people might think, well, geez, you've reinvented what Dolby Atmos or DTS or RO3D is. No, we didn't do that. We just, through experience, adapted it to our world, which is pulling this stuff off in small spaces.
I was going to lead on from that, Walt, with regards to you were saying about the different people and the different spaces. I mean, audio is so subjective. You know, the way I listen to audio and the way I like my system set up is going to be different to you and to everybody else. How do you deal with that? And again, how does the sort of standard and the notion of, again, the subjectiveness of what one person likes to another person like, how does that fit in with regards to these practices?
I know Peter's passionate about.
Go on, we'll fair with it, Peter.
I'm, you know, one thing I'm really good at is car analogies. So I'm going to give you a car analogy because everyone gets car analogies. If you drive a BMW 5 Series, it's the best car in the world. If all you've been driving all your life is a little Hyundai i10 and you drive a 5 Series, you're going to go, yeah, this is the business. This is the bee's knees. I love it. I want it. It's the perfect car. Right. But if I let you drive a Lexus or a Mercedes E-Series or an Audi A6, you might actually think, I prefer this. It doesn't make the other one bad. So what we do is we're kind of looking at the fundamental engineering verticals, and in car analogy is, you know, how fast is it? How fast does it accelerate? How quiet is it? These are very objectively definable metrics. Once you get up that vertical scale, you then have a horizontal where every manufacturer just has a different flavor, has a different balance of compromises. And we're not define, you know, one of the strange things, and I know it might seem strange, but we don't actually define what the perfect frequency response is. Right. Because there's no such thing as the perfect frequency response. Flat is not the perfect frequency response. You know, there is some subjectivity there. So what we're basically saying is if you design according to one of the 4 levels, and that's something we can definitely talk about, that it will get you from your Hyundai i10 to your 3 Series BMW kind of level, to your 5 Series kind of BMW level, and right at the top, you know, is it a Ferrari? But if it's a Ferrari, you might prefer a McLaren, you might prefer an Aston Martin. So it's all about getting to that kind of level. Right. But then you have a lot of subjectivity across the top.
It's an interesting analogy. I love that because, again, I like a bit of audio. I've got a reasonable setup at home in my my smart home setup. But and again, we were talking before we pressed record about the audio and video that we're all using. So I think I class myself as a 5 Series, but talk us through these kind of 4 levels. And again, where do I step up to the 7 and the Bentley and the Rolls Royce or wherever we're going from there.
And all right, another analogy, not a car one, but a different one. And can consider yourself in an art gallery. Okay. And there's a picture hanging on the wall, and it's covered by a piece of museum glass. And the glass is really, really dirty. And you're looking at this picture going, all right, I can see it's a landscape. There's some hills, there's some sea. It's probably sunset. Nah, I don't really know what's going on. Walk on. If you then clean the glass enough, you can go, oh, okay, it's definitely sunset. I can see it's an impressionist painting. I'm beginning to see some colors. I'm beginning to see some texture. I get what the artist was trying to say. And that's level one. So we define level one as the baseline for reproducing artistic intent. You'll be able to get the story that the storytellers, that the content creators are giving you. That's level one. Clean the glass a bit more, and you begin to see textures, you begin to see color graduations, you begin to see the full kind of fervor of that artwork coming through. That's level two. Clean the glass so it's perfectly clean. There's no smears, there's no dirt. It's, oh wow, that's wonderful. That's level three, and that's what we consider reference.
Right.
Take the glass away, that's level four.
Right.
So then there's really nothing between you and that artwork. So as you go through the levels, what we're considering you're doing is you're basically cleaning the window into the artistic intent of the content creators.
Right. Okay.
So Neil, question: which analogy do you like better?
Again, I love it. It's an interesting. There's a great piece of music I listened. It was a cover of it was a Dire Straits track. There's a cover that someone did. I love the cover that they did, but the way they recorded it and the way they had their mic set up, you could hear the guy going and breathing in through his nose.
Yep.
In between almost everything. So it was too good. And once I heard it, once I'd heard that one thing, every time I listened to it, I heard him going, every kind of time he took a breath, and it ruined it completely. So from that, I wanted the glass. I wanted the filter. I didn't want to hear his breath every time he took it. It was recorded too well. That's my analogy on that one.
That was the intent of the producer and the artist.
Okay.
So the system was just revealing that intent.
All right.
It's a really interesting conversation because we're currently in debate around this concept of infrabass. An infrabass is bass below 20 hertz. And I've spoken to some content creators saying, well, you shouldn't reproduce it because, this was never heard. I've talked to other content creators. There's a facility in London, a mixing, mastering, post-production facility called Delane Lee.
Right.
And they've got frequency response there really, really good, down to 10 hertz. So they know that infrabass is there. So it's part of the creative intent. But infrabass exists on other content, and the content creators didn't have any idea that it was there in the first place. Right. So there is a debate to say, is that real or not? But when it comes down to it, all we can do is open the window. If the calibrator and the customer then choose to have a preset that doesn't reproduce anything below 20 hertz, at least they have that option. And really the levels are about opening that window on the content to give whoever's commissioning and calibrating the system the opportunity to deliver whatever they want.
Yeah, more importantly, infrabass exists in life. We live with it. So it's there. So yeah, it's interesting discussion.
And obviously we're talking about the audio out. Well, we've so far been talking about the audio output, but there's a lot of other things. I see behind you what you've got some acoustic tiles on your wall. So your setup, you've obviously looked at again room treatment and things like that.
Yeah, most of it's this way and that way. Yeah, and that way. But yeah,
I was going to say, how much does this bring in things like layouts, wall treatments, location, acoustic treatments, rather than again we were talking about frequency responses a second ago. What about other environmental pieces in this? How does that figure into this, and what's covered around that?
That's a really good question that has a really, really, really long answer that I know we don't have time for. One of the biggest problems in acoustics is there is so little consensus on what's correct. If you ask 10 acousticians for a solution to a problem, you're going to get 13 different answers. And the only things we could really recommend as hard recommended numbers in RP22 are things that there's broad consensus over. So we have a very robust discussion around room acoustics, And there is a parameter for reflection decay time. Most people would say reverberation time. It's still measured as an RT60,
Right.
but we don't call it reverberation because in rooms that are that small, they're not large enough to be statistically reverberant. So it's more properly called reflection decay time. We spent months talking about and formulating a recommendation for target reflection decay times in rooms, but broadband. So not what's the RT time of your room? Oh, it's 0.3 seconds. Not just one number, but numbers across the frequency spectrum. Towards the end, we then realized we actually had no empirical data to back up our recommendations. So those numbers were removed as hard numbers and just taken to a much broader discussion. So there's a very robust discussion around room acoustics, but we have very, very, very few hard numbers to define exactly what they are objectively.
Yeah, Neil, to add to that, when you said, what would you need to do to raise, I believe, the level of your system? And one of those is bring money, because one of Peter's passions is, and everybody's passion is, the room itself and the noise floor. And that is where, when you talked about acoustical treatments, and I think Peter says this, and rightly so, and I agree. The room is super important. A lot of people would rather spend money on getting a quiet environment than just getting louder amplifiers and louder speakers, because you're going to miss detail of stuff that's below the noise floor. So that's one of the things that really separates level 3 and level 4 and level 2 is having a quiet space.
Yep.
I've got a slightly odd view about the phrase acoustic treatment, right? Because you treat something when it's sick. When something is
my room's sick.
You treat it, and to me, yeah, exactly. Have an ibuprofen or take a paracetamol or something. That treats the symptoms. Room design is really, really important, and rather than calling them room treatments, I'd rather call them products that affect the acoustic behavior of a room.
Okay.
And if that's something you buy as a pre-engineered product, fantastic. However you do it, great. But it's best to design that in an integrated, holistic way, I think, rather than looking at it, oh, I've got a room, let's go into a catalog of acoustic treatments and treat the room because it's sick. I think they should be designed to be healthy in the first place.
Well, I love that. So I'll do a quick segue, because I live more in the world of commercial. It's fair to say, again, the home stuff is and the smart home stuff is definitely a hobby for me. Although, again, obviously at Crestron we cover both parts of the portfolio. And there's so many meeting rooms that I go into, and you just do the kind of clap. You sit there and do a clap, and it's just like rings and so live. And I just think, God, why can't you? And they're obviously they're not listening to audio and all the rest of it. They're having meetings, but again, it's like this. There's so many corporate spaces that could do with. They are very sick. They are very sick. They need a full on Walt.
I was just in a room. You're not going to believe this. This is like a high-end office building for a meeting, and it was a round glass room with a domed ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
You couldn't commute. They're like, hey, we can't really do conference calls in here. I'm like, yeah, you can. Like, how do we fix it? And I'm like, that's a major job to try to fix this.
Architects love glass
put a square in
rooms. Yeah, glass meeting rooms. It's like the worst thing you can do is to build a glass goldfish bowl meeting room and put a video audio conferencing system in there, because it's going to sound terrible.
But I think one of the nice things about RP22 is that a classic room in a lot of residences that's never thought about in terms of acoustics is a dining room. Right. Now, if you think dining room, you think place to eat. Well, no, dining rooms are places to socialize. They're places to have conversations. They're places to sit around the table and be present with people. And if you follow a lot of the acoustic recommendations in RP22, you're going to design yourself acoustically a really, really, really comfortable space for dining. Modern architecture is, these days is so biased towards lots of concrete, lots of glass, lots of hard surfaces. have that in a dining room, it's just a cacophony of sound. It's terrible.
Hear the
And
chanking of the
beauty
knife
of
and fork on the
RP20
plates, and
yeah.
Ah,
The beauty of RP22 is, sure, we've written it primarily for sort of multi-channel movie and Dolby Atmos music reproduction, those kind of things. But everything in it is just good common sense, raw engineering for audio.
and Neil, one other application of that is RP22 helps you have those discussions with your customers. So if the customer's like, yeah, I want to have a complete glass wall here, or the designer or the architect, this document can say, well, if you do that, I'm not going to be able to deliver you X, Y, Z. So it's not just a design thing. It's also to help integrators. And I know Peter uses it, and I know others too, that it's really helpful in the sales process when you're trying to talk to someone about what they want and how you're going to deliver it.
Right. And how have the integrators and moreover the manufacturers taken to this? What's the have you had, again, let's not throw anyone under the bus, let's not name names, but again, what's the general consensus being of integrators and manufacturers to this? Is everybody on board? Has there been some pushback? Has there been some interesting conversations around this?
There have been some interesting conversations around this. I think broadly, at least publicly, the vast majority of people are going, this is absolutely fantastic. There's been a little bit of pushback. I think there's been pushback from the kind of companies that go, oh, I've been in business for 30 years. I have happy customers.
Don't like change. This is how we've always done it. Why should we do it differently?
Exactly that, Neil. Exactly that. And there has been a little bit of pushback from some manufacturers who, have looked at the way they do things, looked at RP22, and maybe commercially it doesn't quite work out. But I think, broadly there's been really, really good acceptance, and it's certainly been a great catalyst for us to talk about the future of CEDIA standards and CEDIA recommended practices. And it's, my mission is to say to people, look, this is just the beginning. RP22 is the first. It's not the complete picture. And only when we've published RP1 and RP23 and RP32 and RP33, I appreciate everyone's already confused with numbers. So get on board, be part of CEDIA standards, and you'll be a lot more familiar with them. But once we have the complete picture, then I think people go, oh, okay, now we get what you were really trying to do with RP22. That's a piece of the puzzle rather than the complete picture. And it will take a little bit of time for the industry to catch up. It's the first time ever we've had a proper recommendation for objective performance levels. And to me, as someone that talks to end users, talks to architects, talks to interior designers, talks to property developers, it's actually been revelationary, because when I'm talking to them, it really is, look, this is not my opinion, this is not me trying to make life difficult. This is the industry consensus recommended practice. This is engineering. If a structural engineer says to an architect, no, we need that column there because otherwise the building's going to fall down. If I then say, no, the door, the entrance to the theatre, to the cinema has to be there, because if it goes anywhere else, it's going to interrupt where a speaker or a subwoofer needs to go, then there's much, much more acceptance. So, Walt's absolutely right. Everyone looks at it and goes, oh, engineering. But actually, I think it's just as much about sales. And it's also really links into a company's brand. And one thing I hope, and I'll use another analogy. When you go to a restaurant, the single most important thing about a restaurant is the chef. A chef will make and break the restaurant. And when you go to a restaurant, you trust the chef. You're probably not going to ask where the raw ingredients came from. You're probably not going to ask what recipe they use. You're gonna trust the chef. And CEDIA Expo, that's a raw ingredient show. That's a show for, some of the most fantastic raw ingredients that there are on the planet. We as CEDIA, we're working on writing the recipes in CEDIA standards, but now it's time for the industry to acknowledge that they need to be better chefs. And if those chefs are based on the engineering, then it no longer becomes a product conversation. It becomes a chef conversation. And that's very, very powerful, because a customer can buy those same raw ingredients from almost any company, but they can only buy that particular meal, that particular level of putting those raw ingredients in the right way from that particular chef. And certainly for us, that's been transformational in terms of branding. And I think the industry is beginning to cotton onto that. Now, this doesn't marginalize the raw ingredients. It absolutely doesn't make the raw ingredients less important, but it puts more of the onus on the chef, which I think is an amazing branding opportunity for companies.
It helps the chef know which ingredients are going to be applicable to which recipe or which job. So, yeah, it's all really good. And we do rough stuff like, don't put the powder in first and then add the fluid. Put in the fluid and then add the powder.
So you could put hot chili in a dessert. I didn't know where you were going to go with that analogy, Will.
As well as, it needs to have some slight temperature changes when you're doing this to that. So, complex to easy.
In dessert.
There
What's
you go.
that?
Chili in dessert. He loves chili in dessert, he was saying. Again, it's subjectivity. It's why we're all different and why we all need different things. So,
the other thing, Neil, before you go, I just wanted you to know it's not a final document either.
I was going to say,
this is the initial release. Yeah, this is the initial release. We're going to this kind of thing needs revisions as it's out there. As we learn more, it'll be revised. And there's things that aren't in it right now. We don't talk about what to do with the center channel and the giant solid emissive display. Instead of two-piece projection, we don't, there's all kinds of things happening in base right now. We don't get into that right now. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other things too. So it's just like with anything, you have to draw a line in the sand or you're never going to get it done. And I think 6 years, we decided, okay, we better release it.
So again, this is an evolving organic thing that will be iterated and revised, and again, the practices will be updated. And again, you were talking about some of the new other standards come out. Again, as Dolby come out with new stuff, or those other elements come in, or different technologies come in, again, they will be implemented and blended into this, I guess, in future updates and revisions around this on a roadmap in the future.
Absolutely. It was in danger of becoming the ultimate scope creep document. It's already 147 pages. We could have just carried on and on and on and on. And I'll be 83 years old, still chairing this working group, and we'll be up to 1,647 pages writing this huge tome that no one was going to read. So, at some point in these efforts, you've got to draw a line and go, okay, I know it's not complete, but it's pretty much there. Right. And the other thing to mention about all our work, and this is a lens that we look at everything through. We're writing this for the 97%, not for the 3%.
Oh, there we go. We got it.
Yay. And what I mean by that is, and this is another plea for everyone to please consider getting involved with CEDIA standards, is we need people on these working groups who are not experienced. We need people who are not particularly subject matter experts, because we need them to put their hand up and go, well, Peter, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo what's going on. I don't understand this.
I'm in.
And
where do I sign?
Yeah. It's pointless us releasing a document that the majority of the community look at and goes, this is over my head. We have to write things that are applicable to the 97, the 95, the 97%, not that top 3% of companies doing ridiculously high-end work. And one of the criticisms that's been leveled at RP22 is, this is only for £1 million rooms, $1 million, euros, whatever. Well, no. I mean, we don't talk about price. We're not allowed to talk about price. And secondly, when I've taught now about 130, 140 people over the last year on a series of 2-day design workshops, and they're working on 2 rooms. One of the rooms is a big expensive, no budget, shoot for the stars room. The other room, I asked them to draw a little room, a garage conversion kind of size room, and say, okay, my challenge to you is engineer this from an audio perspective at level 1 for as little money as possible.
Right.
And everyone is always staggered that with a little bit of judicial work, with calculators and rulers and protractors, and a little bit of perhaps going out of their current product catalog and looking at a few other different suppliers, all of them go, yeah, I can do this well within the budget of my sweet spot. So the most important performance level isn't level 4. Everyone looks at it and goes, oh, I'm going to do level 4 systems all day long. I'm sorry, you're not.
No.
They are staggeringly unachievable. They are really, really difficult to achieve, and rightly so. Level 4 is for when the billionaire comes along and says, I want the best. And now we have an objective definition that's not product specific of what that means. Level 1 is still really, really good. It's all you need. It's a 3 Series BMW. It's brilliant. It's great. But with some engineering, it's achievable for not that much money. And I think that's exciting for the industry.
Peter, would you say, as you've taught these 130 people, and a lot of these people are very experienced, pretty much every time somebody's had a eureka and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. And how many of them do you think might even have made level 0 systems?
All the time. I look back on the stuff that I was engineering 3, 4, 5 years ago that I thought was a business. And, as I think we all do, we look back on the work that we've been doing as we learn more and more and more. And the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know and how much more there is to learn. But there's always, oh, wow moments, and I'll give you an example. Wide front speakers in an Atmos layout, please don't flush mount them against the wall and have them firing at each other, because then once you get to where the listeners are, you're probably listening to that speaker 60 degrees off axis. So when you take that cheap, crappy little mic from the AVR and press the button for it to do an auto EQ, it's going to try and massively boost the high frequencies, which are then going to lower the sound pressure level capability of that speaker. You're in danger of damaging it. It's not going to sound very good. It's free. It doesn't cost any money to figure out a way of mounting those speakers so they're tilted towards the listeners. And when we do that exercise from an engineering perspective, and we look at the off-axis dispersion of speakers, and the learners calculate the effect of actually orientating that speaker properly, there are so many light bulbs that go off. So our RP22 it's not about throwing more money at the system. It's about free performance. It's just about doing some engineering calculations and getting as much as possible out of those fantastic raw ingredients that you use.
Fantastic. So where do we start? Where do we go? Where for us, level -5 people, again, driving around in our Hyundais, where do we go to get to our 3, 5, 7 series? And again, how can we take our ingredients and zhuzh them up a bit to make them better? Where do we start? Where do we go? What's your kind of like top 3 ways to start with regards to taking the practices of RP22?
I think the first step is to just take an engineering mindset towards everything. RP22 is on paper verification, and there is so much that you can look at your fundamental layout, you can look at orientations, you can look at sound pressure levels, you can look at bass extension, you can look at bass SPL. There's so much you can work out on a piece of paper. So just take that engineering mindset. I think the other thing that you can do is take some systems that you've already done, you've already designed, you've already installed, and just look at those drawings and see what levels those those systems actually got to. I think some you'll probably be, oh, okay, you know, I did a really good job. Some you might actually be very, very surprised, and you might look at things like wide fronts. You might think, oh, well, two big 15-inch subwoofers in that room, surely that's enough. But when you do the calculations, you'll realize, oh, maybe it isn't. And that, you know, that's one of the specs that RP1 is going to be essential for, because you have a subwoofer manufacturer. Really, you know, I'm not criticizing the subwoofer, but they say it goes down to 15 hertz. Sure, of course it does. Any subwoofer can do 15 hertz. At what sound pressure level? And, you know, once you start taking that engineering mindset and doing the calculations, I think your world will change. And the third area is embrace it, and don't just think of it as an engineering document. Think about it as one of the single most powerful sales tools you have when you're talking to clients, when you're talking to architects, when you're talking to interior designers. You don't go to a surgeon and tell the surgeon how to do the operation. You don't, you know, the surgeon's not going to ask you what prophylactic antibiotic would you like after the operation. You go to a surgeon because you're paying them to be the expert. And I think with the recommended practices that we're developing, it adds a huge amount of credibility to our industry, because rather than just focusing on brand and fluffy, silly audiophile phrases, we've for the first time got some objective numbers to aim for. And the last thing I'll say is it's a recommended practice. So don't obsess over, oh, I've got to make everything level 4. And an example is for a level 4 room, we require bass, so LFE, low frequency effects, to be at least 118 dB at 16 hertz. Okay, that's quite a significant amount of energy. If you're doing a system for a customer in an apartment, in a condominium, or in a terraced house where you have neighbors, that's just not going to fly.
No.
So one of the beauties of it is, yeah, they're numbers, and to get a level 4 room, you've got to achieve all of them. But sometimes it's just not practical. So it enables you to have a sensible, balanced conversation with the customer to say, look, you know, there's 21 different parameters here. Only 3 of them are concerned with maximum sound pressure level. Only 3. There's still the other 18 that we can look at. So the system isn't, you know, it's not going to go as loud, but it's still going to be incredible. It's going to be dynamic. It's going to be fantastic. Let's focus on making the room really quiet rather than focus on making it really loud. And it just enables you to have that balanced conversation. And to me, that's very, very powerful.
Fantastic.
I have a before step 1.
Yeah, go on.
That is, keep an open mind and think that you need that you need to have education. You should always be learning. Don't say, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't need this, because Peter and others that have taught this workshop have had people in there that have, you know, many, many years of experience, and they've all learned something and or changed their processes as a result. So mindset would be my first thing.
Yeah. I love it. Again, I'm definitely on the bus, and for me and everybody else that's now listening